There's a kind of silence that, when it appears, people often do not immediately recognize its true meaning. It is not loud like anger, nor as clear as words of blame. It is the silence that comes after a person has been hurt too many times. When explanations no longer have value, when arguments no longer have meaning, and when the heart has become so tired that it no longer wants to say anything at all. Many people think silence is weakness, but psychology shows the opposite. Sometimes silence is the sign of a deep transformation happening inside a person. A moment when emotions no longer explode outward but begin to transform into observation, withdrawal, and sometimes a major decision that others do not even notice. In this video, we will explore the real psychology of people who become silent when they are hurt. What is happening in their minds, why they choose silence instead of reacting, and why that silence can sometimes be the signal of a very big change in their lives. If you are interested in human psychology, the hidden corners of emotions and behavior, please subscribe to the channel and watch until the end of the video. Because in this story, you might recognize yourself or understand more about someone who once quietly walked out of your life. When that silence continues, what the outside world sees is simply a person becoming quieter. But inside them, a complex psychological process is taking place. It is not emptiness. It is an ongoing internal dialogue. Memories, emotions, and questions keep returning like waves. They recall every small detail of the moment that hurt them: a glance, a seemingly careless remark, an indifference with no explanation. To others, it may have been just a passing moment, but to them, it becomes an emotional marker that the mind does not easily let go of. In psychology, humans tend to try to find meaning in painful experiences. When something hurts us, the brain does not simply feel the pain, it begins searching for answers. Why did this happen? What did I do wrong? Did the other person truly understand me? These questions repeat over and over in the mind, like a film being replayed again and again. And in that process, silence becomes the necessary space for them to think, analyze, and try to understand what truly happened. This is why many emotionally sensitive people do not react immediately when they are hurt. They do not want to react on instinct. They do not want their emotions to explode in a way that could destroy something important. So they choose to pause. That pause is sometimes misunderstood as coldness, but in reality, it is the sign of someone trying to control the storm inside themselves. In that moment, they are not only processing the present pain, they are also confronting old memories. Because emotional pain rarely exists alone, it often connects with previous experiences. A sentence spoken today may touch a wound that has existed for many years. A small disappointment may awaken the feeling of abandonment they once experienced in the past. And when those memories rise all at once, the mind needs time to reorganize everything. That is why their silence sometimes carries a deep sense of contemplation. They begin to observe more, they listen more, they pay attention to details they might have once ignored. Because when trust is hurt, people naturally become more cautious, not to seek revenge, but to better understand what is happening around them. Interestingly, many people who become silent when they are hurt often have a very high capacity for empathy. They understand the emotions of others more deeply than most, and that variability makes them more vulnerable to being hurt. When an ordinary person hears a careless remark, they may ignore it. But someone who is emotionally sensitive will sense the layers of meaning hidden behind those words. They notice changes in tone. They notice differences in how others treat them. And sometimes those small details are enough to make them feel disappointed. But instead of reacting with anger, they choose to withdraw. This does not mean they are weak. In fact, in many cases, it is a very mature form of self-protection. Because when people react immediately while emotions are rising, they may say things they will later regret. Those words can destroy relationships, create new wounds, and make everything more complicated. In contrast, silence allows them to create a temporary distance between emotion and action. That distance may be small, but it is extremely important. It allows reason a chance to appear. It allows them to look back at the situation more calmly. And sometimes that very pause helps them realize things they had never understood before. In many cases, silence is also a way to reevaluate a relationship. When they are hurt, they begin asking important questions. Is this relationship truly safe for me? Does this person genuinely respect my emotions? What warning signs did I ignore before? These questions are not meant to assign blame. They are part of the process of emotional growth. And during that process, they also begin to look back at themselves. They wonder whether they have placed too many expectations on others. They reflect on how they respond to pain. They try to understand themselves more deeply. This is a very important step in psychological development, because it helps people become more self-aware of their own emotions. However, this process is not easy at all. It requires a great deal of mental energy. When a person has to keep all of their emotions inside, it can make them feel exhausted. They may feel lonely because no one truly knows what they are going through. On the outside, they appear calm, but inside, they are dealing with many complicated thoughts and emotions. That is the paradox of silence when someone is hurt. Others see the calmness, they do not see the internal struggle. They think everything is fine. But in reality, the silent person is still trying to regain their emotional balance. And when that process slowly comes to an end, their silence often leads to a change. Sometimes they return and speak about what they have been thinking. Sometimes they decide to forgive. But there are also times when they simply move forward without ever coming back. Because in that long silence, they have realized one important truth. Not every relationship can be preserved. Not every person can understand their emotions. And sometimes the healthiest way to protect the heart is to accept that some stories are meant to end in silence. When looking more deeply into the behavior of silence after being hurt, many psychologists realize that this is not merely a temporary emotional reaction. It is often a pattern that was formed very early in life. Children who grow up in environments where their emotions are not listened to, where tears are seen as weakness, or where sadness is considered a nuisance, gradually learn a very clear lesson. The safest thing is to keep everything to themselves. Instead of expressing pain, they learn to smile. Instead of speaking about their feelings, they learn to withdraw. And over time, silence becomes a survival skill. When those children grow up, that skill remains. It becomes a natural reflex whenever they are hurt. In situations where others might react with words or strong emotions, they become quiet. Not because they feel nothing. On the contrary, they often feel too much. Precisely because the emotions are so strong, they need a moment of silence to keep everything from breaking apart. That silence is like a closed room in the mind. There, they can place their chaotic emotions down and observe them from a distance. They examine each thought, each memory, each uncomfortable feeling that appears. They try to understand what is truly happening inside themselves. This is a deep internal process that outsiders rarely notice. In many cases, silent people are not trying to avoid reality. They are facing it in their own way. Instead of reacting immediately, they choose to step back and observe. They ask themselves whether this pain comes from someone else's actions or from old wounds that have not yet healed. They wonder whether their reaction is fair or not. And through that process of reflection, they are learning to understand themselves more deeply. However, the outside world rarely has patience for this kind of response. We live in a society accustomed to speed. People expect immediate answers, immediate explanations, and immediate reactions. When someone becomes silent, that space makes others uncomfortable. And when people feel uncomfortable with silence, they often fill that space with assumptions. They assume the silent person is angry. They think the person is indifferent. They believe silence means no longer caring. But the reality is often the complete opposite. Many people who become silent when they are hurt are actually the ones who care the most. They care so deeply that they do not want to say words that could destroy something important. They care enough to make sure that when they speak, their words will come from calmness rather than from temporary pain. There is a form of emotional intelligence within this silence. It is the ability to recognize that not every reaction needs to happen immediately. Sometimes the wisest thing you can do is pause. That pause allows emotions to settle. It allows the mind to shift from a reactive state to a reflective one. And when that happens, people can see the bigger picture more clearly. But here another paradox appears. Silence can protect a person in the short term, but if it lasts too long, it can become a wall that separates them from the world. When you become used to keeping everything inside, you gradually begin to believe that no one can understand you. You start to think that explaining your feelings is useless. And over time, what began as self protection turns into isolation. This causes many people to fall into a difficult psychological loop. They remain silent to avoid being hurt again. But that silence causes others to misunderstand them. The misunderstanding creates distance, and that distance makes them feel even more alone. Eventually, they withdraw even deeper into the original silence. Yet, what is important to understand is that silence is not the end of the healing process. In many cases, it is only the first step. It is the necessary pause before a person can find the right language to express their pain. Just as water needs time to settle after a storm, the human mind also needs time to stabilize before it can think clearly. As that process unfolds, many people begin to realize that their pain is not only something to endure, but also something that can be shared. They understand that speaking about their emotions is not always weakness. In many cases, it is an act of courage. Because to speak one's truth, a person must accept the possibility of being misunderstood, rejected, or hurt once again. But it is within that courage that genuine connections can be created. When someone dares to say that they have been hurt, they open the door to understanding. They allow others to see their true human side, not the silent version the world usually sees, but the person who is feeling, thinking, and trying to heal. And that may be the most important thing to understand about people who become silent when they are hurt. Their silence is not a sign of disappearance. It is a pause, a necessary quiet space where they gather the scattered pieces of their emotions. When they are ready, they may return to their voice, not with the original chaos, but with greater clarity and maturity. In that way, silence is no longer a place that imprisons them. It becomes a step in the journey of emotional growth, a temporary space where a person learns to understand themselves more deeply before reconnecting with the world.